liken it to my husband's a professional photographer, and he has invested thousands and thousands of dollars in his photography equipment, in his time, in his education, just in his website, in me. That's a joke. Okay. Anyway, so once he takes a photo, that is his intellectual property. And if
Exactly.
you were to take that photo and just use it without his permission or without paying him anything, now he's invested all of that for nothing.
Exactly.
For nothing. You are listening to another awesome episode of the Music Ed Mentor Podcast, where we help music educators to build, manage, and grow thriving school music programs and have long and happy careers. I am your host, Elisa Jansen-Jones, and you can get all the good content I'm creating for you at musicedmentor.com, or pick up a copy of School Band and Orchestra magazine and read my column in there. This, my friends, is an exciting episode, if only because it's going to give you some very much needed clarity about what you can and cannot do with music you didn't create. Because, if you created it, you can pretty much do anything you want with it. But if somebody else created it, you owe them some, clout. Copyright has been such a hassle and such a blessing and such a curse for music educators, and for the most part, we've ignored it. Because navigating it all can give you massive anxiety, especially when you hear the kind of horror stories you'll hear in this episode. But don't worry, my guest today is not a lawyer, but he does know a lot due to the fact that he's an arranger, a composer, a conductor, and a music publisher. His name is Dr. Steve Martin, and his publishing company is GPG Music. Steve is going to help us on the path of making the right decisions when it comes to streaming our performances, copying our folios, arranging our own pop tunes, or burning CDs. But don't fear. Not only do we cover what not to do, we're going to talk about how to get the permissions to do all that we want and more so that you're totally legal and not about to get sued for something. But first, of course, we have to thank the companies that help bring this knowledge-packed episode to your ears. If you teach concert band and are looking for engaging selections for your next performance, check out the catalog at GPG Music. With full band scores starting at just $45 and new selections often, you'll find a piece your young band will love. And for you marching band directors, GPG has everything you need to craft a powerful and moving field show or indoor percussion show. Not only do you get the music, but you can also get an adapt-it-yourself drill with the high and low points in the music already lined up for maximum impact. It's awesome. At GPG Music, they partner with music educators to inspire the next generation. Check out all of the cutting-edge offerings at gpgmusic.com. This episode is also brought to you by Key Leaves. Have you discovered how the Key Leaves tool works for your saxophones? This simple device props open the keys to ensure maximum airflow and minimum pad rot. For less than a pack of reeds, you'll be protecting your saxophone and preventing the need for costly repairs. Key Leaves was so loved, it won the SBO Magazine's Best Tools for Schools Award in 2019. Check out the demo videos and sign up for their newsletter to stay in the loop on all the new exciting products at keyleaves.com. That's KEYLEAVES.com. And finally, our Music Ed Mentor podcasts are all supported by Smart Music. Have you tried the new sight reading builder in Smart Music? Just enter in the parameters you want to have your students practice and sight read, and the sight reading builder will generate an exercise for you. Stop spending hours entering in notation and let the Smart Music sight reading builder do it for you. Learn more at smartmusic.com/SRB. That's smartmusic.com/SRB. Now, let's get our copyright primer on with Dr. Steve Martin.
I am Steve Martin. I am co-owner and vice president of GPG Music in Reno, Nevada. I have been with that company for the last 15 years. I started it with my partner, Gary P. Gilroy, and I have 3 degrees in music education and conducting. I have chosen to be in the business sector and try to help music educators through our products and services all over the world, as opposed to being in one classroom with one set of students. And that's been very fulfilling. Also the associate conductor of a community band here in Reno, Nevada. And my beautiful wife is an elementary music educator, and I've got 2 little kids that are both going bananas on piano and singing and just about to embark on their instrumental musical careers as well. So music everywhere in my life, quite fulfilling.
Yeah, it's been really fun to get to chat with you. This is not our first conversation, our listeners should know, because we get to have a chance to really get down and talk shop, especially since we're both community band directors, which is a total blast. You have fun with it, don't you?
Oh yeah, it's a very different dynamic, obviously, than working with young kids. But one of the things that's so fun is you just have this huge spectrum of people who are both very talented and experienced and even professional musicians. And then you've got people who walk up and say, my instrument's been in the case for 40 years. Can I come play in your band? And it's like, yeah, we got a spot. And the idea of musical camaraderie and that experience that, obviously has a fond place in their heart, because 40 years later, they say, I want to do it again. And, admittedly, not coming at it with the highest level of proficiency, but more about the community of music. So I think that's pretty special.
Yeah, I find it to be so fulfilling and rewarding. And I started in my community band. We're kind of going tangential from our core discussion, but I started in it because I just wanted to play horn again. And then I got to know all the people, and it became such an important network for me, and I can't say enough about it. So that being said, sometimes we have too many flute players and we don't have enough flute parts. And so maybe we're tempted to, we always buy the flute part, but sometimes we might want to copy. That might happen for some people. So Steve, I want you to kind of lecture me about copyright. And I really want to know what the difference is between copyright versus licensing for performance versus what I need to do to be able to actually record it and sell it and produce it and get it out there. And am I allowed to make flute parts if I have too many flute players for flute parts? And just like instruct me on all of that. Okay, go.
Absolutely. And, the first thing that I want to say very clearly is I am far from an attorney, and anything that I say is really just the amalgamation of experience and knowledge and the resources I've had at my disposal over the last several years. I feel an interesting, I guess I'm both parts of the dichotomy. I'm a publisher and I'm an arranger. So when I am arranging other people's work, I'm working with the publisher of that work to obtain the rights to do that. And if somebody wants to arrange or modify my music, then they have to work with me as a publisher. So being on both sides of that coin has given me a chance to not only just have both perspectives, but a lot of research and gaining information and tapping a lot of resources on both sides of that. So I think that brings things together in a pretty unique perspective for me, and hopefully that's helpful to everybody else. I'm not an attorney, so none of this is official legal advice. It's really just the nuts and bolts and all the different pieces that you pretty much just rattled off about surrounding somebody's intellectual property. And in the case of what we're talking about today, composers who have written a piece of music, a melody that is theirs, and for whatever reason you need to, you're going to either use it just by performing it, playing it, performing it, or you're going to do some of the other things that we'll talk about later where you might need to license it. So the first thing that you need to know is any piece of sheet music that has a copyright notice at the bottom of it, you need permission to duplicate it. We all know that it's decades and decades and decades old, that band directors would get a set of music, they would have 6 flute parts, they needed 10, or clarinet or sax, whatever it is. And we go to the copy machine and we copy 6 or 7 pages of music and we tape them all together, and we have to reduce it down from the 9x12 size because, that's kind of why they do the 9x12 size. I think it also comes from a European tradition, but I think that's part of it. That's not okay. And as much as everybody's been doing it and nobody's gone on a rampage from school to school across the United States to to get people in trouble, it isn't the right thing to do. So what is the right thing to do? Well, you're supposed to either buy the parts from a distributor. So if you're a person who uses a website like Pepper, or you have a local sheet music company, you can order those parts through them, and then you've done your job. The other thing you can do is contact the publisher directly, which is the person listed on the copyright or the company listed on the copyright at the bottom, and ask them for permission. And they will either give you permission or they will say, yes, you can, and you need to pay us $1.50 a copy or $2.75 a copy or whatever. There's always the wrinkles when things are permanently out of print, which is more common on the older literature. We're moving to this age where there's digital downloads, e-print, where you almost pay per print of what you need. And that's obviously, there's a lot of reasons why that's great. You get exactly the number of parts you want. And that's just, again, all those are so many different configurations. Sometimes you're still just buying a band set that has X amount of parts for each instrument. But if it's permanently out of print, you do your due diligence. And then I think you have, again, unofficial legal advice, you have quite a bit of latitude because you're out of options. So I don't really have specific advice, and I have not so far been able to find out from any of my resources exactly what you're supposed to do. But other than that specific situation, you need to be respecting the copyright and only duplicate if you have permission. Let's see. We should probably talk about a few definitions and the roles of people as they apply to those definitions of things. So,
okay, wait. Okay, I have a question.
Yes.
What if I want my students to not have the original copies, right? But I buy enough of the originals to meet the needs of my band, but I want them to keep it in like a binder. And so I need it just shrunk down the size. So then can I justify making copies to slide it into the sheet protectors so that they can put it in a binder? Because they're 7th graders. They're going to destroy those parts. And so if I can just like justify it by buying them, but then copying to shrink it down.
To my knowledge, you are not supposed to do that. And that is what I've learned from the people that I've talked to. There is a notion out there that you can have one backup set or an archival set. And I have had conflicting information on that. I'm not so sure that I have a definitive answer for you, but I've had at least one party who has reason to be more knowledgeable on it than I am tell me that that is not okay. And now that I've said that, you could cut that whole thing out if you want, because none of that information is very helpful. But
well, that's okay. It's okay for you to share the information that you've gleaned from elsewhere. Yeah. Okay, go back to, we were talking about definitions and stuff like that.
Yeah, just a few things that you're going to hear over and over as I'm talking. One of the first things is intellectual property, or IP, which in the world we live in today, a lot of people think of that as like the magical, mysterious code behind a piece of software or an app. Anything that you've created yourself that doesn't necessarily exist in hard copy form is intellectual property. So if it's on your computer, on Sibelius, or on Finale, or MuseScore, whichever software you've used to create a new piece of music, you already have a copyright on that just by doing it. You don't have to go. You can take a further step and register things with the U.S. Copyright Office, but once you create something, it is your own personal intellectual property. And that goes for everybody else too. If it's somebody else's that they wrote or a melody that they wrote, it's their intellectual property. And you don't have rights to it unless you get explicit permission from them. We might call the person who owns the IP the rights holder, as we're talking today. Then if that piece of music is published, then the rights holder becomes the publisher. The composer relinquishes the rights to the publisher. So that's an important distinction today, especially because so many people are technically self-published. There's lots of our especially big name like band composers in our world that don't go through a publisher anymore. They have a website. You can order through them, and they might have their own company. Stephen Melillo had Stormworks, but that's really just Stephen Melillo, as far as I know. I might be wrong now. That was 20 years ago. It was like that.
Well, Randall Standridge just started his own publishing company, yep. So there's a good example.
Yeah, and he And that's a person who for a long time was publishing, I think with Grand Mesa mostly. But if you have your own thing and you are your own publisher, then the line becomes a little blurry, and it's also really insignificant because if it's your company or you, it doesn't really matter. One of you is the rights holder, and either way you hold the rights. And then we talk about a user. A user would be probably a performer or a teacher or a consumer. Generally, when we're speaking about rights holders, we're going to say that it's us, the educators, the teachers, the musicians. When you look at all of the different ways that educators use music, this is a quote: "Teachers must be conscious of 6 different types of copyright uses in the classroom." And they are reproducing, recording, preparing derivative works, which would be like a new arrangement, distribution, performance, and display. So display would be, I've got it on an overhead projector, or we're watching a video of Fantasia, right? We all know Fantasia. So those 6 things, anytime you're doing those things, copyright comes into play. The rights holder is either due compensation, or you're falling, as an educator, you might be falling under the couple of copyright provisions, the provisions in the copyright law that allow you to use those things without permission, without explicit permission. So one is called the classroom use exemption, and that there's a code for that, 17 USC 110 Section 1. See, I sound like an attorney, but I'm not an attorney. I just know the letters. So to qualify for the exemption, you must be in a classroom or a similar place devoted to instruction. You must be there in person, engaged face to face, and C, be at a nonprofit educational institution. So that's pretty darn specific. And if you're going to be performing something off-site or anything like that, that goes out the window really, really fast. And it's not, again, we're not in the world of copyright. We're so used to kind of doing whatever we want as teachers over the last several decades that a lot of times all the questions that come at me, similar to one you asked me already, are based on, well, what can I get away with? And what I'm kind of trying to go for with my presentations that I've done across the country in this field is to say, it's not really that. These are people that did work that you thought was so valuable that you wanted to spend a good chunk of time with it. You wanted to play that piece in your concert, or you wanted to arrange that piece for your show choir or for your marching band. If it's that valuable, then that composer is due something for his intellectual property, his or her. And it's not really fair to say, well, if I can get into this and then they won't know, or I can probably make that provision apply here. It's obviously the flip side is none of us are endless pots of money. So there has to be some consideration there. But I think if we can get away from the mentality of, well, how can I get away with this, instead of how does everybody get what they deserve, we're going to be setting better examples for our students as well. So classroom exception is one of them. And then fair use is another one. And that one, people throw that term around a lot. And I don't think most people really know what it means. But essentially, there's 10% of a piece could be photocopied as long as it is just for educational purposes. Like, an example a lot of educators would be familiar with is in your undergraduate work and you're studying in a theory class and, somebody hands out a page of a score and we're going to analyze it, or 3 pages of a score. That's okay for the teacher to photocopy that, assuming the score is 30 pages or more, because 10% of it is 3 pages, and that's okay to do under the Fair Use Act. Fair use is why things like quoting a book in order to review it, or publicly displaying a reproduction of an artwork in order to critique it, are legal. So that's what fair use is. This is from a copyright article on the Duke website, which is in the links. And there are 4 factors that are balanced to determine fair use. The purpose of the use should be for nonprofit education. Factual material is more susceptible to fair use. Creative work like music and art gets stronger protection. 3rd, use only the amount of the original work that's necessary to accomplish the educational purpose. And 4, avoid uses that substitute for purchasing available copies. So they say you're damaging the market for the original counts heavily against fair use, meaning damaging the market is you're reducing the amount of sales. So again, what can I get away with? Well, there's this 12 movement work. I can play one of those movements without having to photocopy it, without having to pay for it, right? It's like, well, again, that first of all, no, that doesn't count because you're performing it. That's very different than just teaching a lesson on it. So those are some of the things that that are floating around out there that people think, well, it's for educational purposes, or it's classroom use, or it's covered under fair use. I hope that debunks a little bit of it, and also, explains really what's behind it.
So if we buy a band score to play in our class, or a, choir folio, and we learn it in class, that's all educational. But when it comes to performance, is there another step we have to take to be able to perform that piece legally? Or does it matter if we're charging for the performance versus a free performance?
Yeah. Performance rights are one of the several types of licenses or permissions that you might need to have in order to use a piece of intellectual property. So I have a list of 6 different kinds of licenses or permissions that we can talk about briefly, and I can give you ideas of how you stay in compliance. But I'll tell you, the one you just asked about is at the end. So is there anything else that you want to talk about before that?
Everybody stay tuned. No, Steve, go in your order, because okay. I think that's the big question that at least is on my mind. So give us some suspense and fill us in, and we'll do that at the end.
Absolutely. Delayed gratification. All right. So I'm going to list them off, and then I'll talk a little about each one. So there's a mechanical license, a synchronization license, permission to arrange, print rights, dramatic or adaptive rights, and performance rights. So all of these would come from the publisher, and they all have different purposes. So the first one, mechanical licensing, that's duplicating your recording. So if you have a recording, your audio recording, and that's an important distinction. You recorded your spring concert, you want to make CDs for the whole band, whether you're going to charge for them or not, you need a mechanical license to reproduce them, and you will pay for that license. So you might want to charge for the CD, even if it's just to cover your costs. So that's physical media. It also applies to internet distribution. So you can't say, well, I'm going to get around that by putting the recording online and name and password, you log in. You especially can't do it on a public site. None of those things are okay without the permission of the publisher. I have not done any licensing for posting on a website, and things like the third-party services like YouTube and Spotify and all those kinds of things, SoundCloud, where you can put your music. I don't know the answer for all of them, but at some point in your life, you checked a little box, and there was about 14 pages of legal stuff in there, and it tells you what you can and can't do in there. So that's where we're all the creatures of, yes, I click the box, sign me up, give me my account. I just want to get this online, or whatever it is. But if you have a question, you go back and read it. Go find where the EULA is, the end user license agreement, or whatever they call it, terms of service, and figure it out. Or you can even sometimes just Google it, especially for the bigger services like YouTube. I'm sure if you just ask the question to Google, it would probably tell you the answer. But I would make sure it's referencing something legit and not just what somebody else thought on the internet. As you know, that's the standard internet disclaimer, right? So I'll tell you, I believe that they have what's called, I think it's called a statutory rate for songs, for audio songs, for mechanical licensing. I believe it is 9.1 cents per track for the first 5 minutes of a song, and then there's a per minute increment. It's like 1.4 cents or something per minute. So if you're recording Stars and Stripes Forever, you're under your 5 minutes, it's 9.1 cents for that track. If you're doing 14-minute work, then you're going to end up paying those incremental fees on top per track. And you also have to be careful that you're doing that the way that the publisher wants you to. In other words, if you're doing La Fiesta Mexicana, you need 3 tracks. You can't just run them all 3 together to pay less, which I don't know that you would at the end of the day anyway, by the time you add it all up. But so those are just, a couple of nuggets to show you there's a little complexity. And the main thing is, whether you're selling it or not, you got to pay for it. The second type of license is synchronization license. Again, you get this from the publisher, and that's for syncing your generated audio of a copyrighted work to video. So this is most commonly like marching band. Obviously, you've got a whole visual component to that. Or if it's show choir and you want to actually have a video, or any performance that you want to make a video of versus just an audio recording, you would need the synchronization license from the publisher. And then another thing that is happening a lot more frequently now that the tools are so accessible and to all of our young people who are so good at this kind of thing, the idea of like a promo video for your program, it's a recruiting video. Hey, look how cool band is. And they've got some kind of, super cool track underneath it that it's a new popular tune that everybody loves, or it's something inspirational off a movie soundtrack. Well, you need to license the synchronization of that audio to your video as well. And so you would need to find out who the publisher is of the music, which gets real tricky when it's obscure like that. And then you license that so that you can put it underneath your video. And the other quick point on that, there are plenty of sites out there now that are just like stock photography sites that have stock audio. And usually the terms of use on those are very explicitly, like it's either royalty free or it's free for promotional use, or you have to pay a small fee. So those fees are very obvious and very easy the licenses are very easy to obtain because it's kind of part of the whole package there. But the problem is when you're doing something, I'll never forget, a long time ago, we did a recruiting video for the Fresno State Bulldog Marching Band that I was part of in the late 90s. And we did a slideshow using slides, like real slides with a slide wheel and a slide projector. And we had a soundtrack to it, and there was probably 4 or 5 songs in there that were variation. It was a whole bunch of things. One that sticks out in my head was "On the Road Again," because that was the little travel section. We get to go on cool trips, and here we are on a bus, and here we are packing up our drums, and here we are, getting out at some huge stadium where we all got to play on this big trip. And, on the road again, there we go. So now we got to pay for that.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't sing more than 10% of it.
Yeah. So it was... that's the kind of thing where, we showed it in 20 band rooms. So I don't know that we were ever going to get in trouble. But if it was nowadays, people do that kind of thing with live video. It's online. They post it on YouTube. They link to it. And so, again, whatever YouTube says you're allowed to do is fine, but you got to be careful. Shall we go on?
Yes, please. I mean, I have 1,000 questions, but I want to make sure that you get through the material and then I'll ask.
Okay, so next is permission to arrange, which that's if you want to take somebody else's work and rearrange it in any way. And this goes from, I don't have very many saxophones, so I'm going to take the second alto sax part and put it into the clarinet part. Any that simple or whole thing, like I'm going to take Bohemian Rhapsody and I'm going to arrange it for marching band. That would be sort of the extreme of an arrangement. So there are 3 different versions of this kind of permission. One would be for an individual song. The second would be for a medley of songs, which is when they are connected without space in between. And the third is grand rights. And that's more for like a whole production, like you're going to take Les Mis and turn it into a full-blown marching band show. Not even marching band. I'm trying to think how that works. If you were going to take Les Mis and make a high school version of it that was not quite as complex as the entire Les Mis musical, you would need grand rights for the entire production.
Les Mis Junior.
Right. Yes, there you go. And so the things to know, the fee, like first of all, a real simple way to do this is to use a company like Trisona. They have emerged over the last 5 or 6 years as a very quick clearinghouse for this kind of a thing, which has been a blessing in so many ways. And there's a faction of people who believe it's too expensive and that there's some other issues with the system. But the bottom line is they're fast and they've never failed me. They get the job done and they have good relationships with so many of the really big publishers that a lot of the requests are fulfilled immediately. And if not, it's quite fast versus a person trying to find somebody at Hal Leonard or at Sony or these big companies and say, I want to do an arrangement for my 6th grade choir of this thing, and it just takes forever. It depends on how you want. You can do it either way. You don't have to go through a third-party broker. That's essentially what I think they are. I don't know if they would call themselves that, but they communicate with the publishers. They get the permission. When I'm done with the arrangement, I upload it, and then the client, the user, then gets an email that says your arrangement's ready. They download it. It has a license stamped on there that it's for Rockford High School or whatever. It's all right there. And it's very slick. So that's cool. What you're paying for there is a general license that gives you permission to use the intellectual property. And then you're paying an estimated amount of copies because the license comes with essentially unlimited duplication. But you tell Tresona that I've got, a marching band with 150 people in it or a sixth grade choir with 30 people in it. And then the price is, there's like margins, 1 to 50. They have them on the back end. You don't even see this part, but your price might be $50 less if you're making 50 less copies, something like that. For a marching band, when I'm writing for a marching band that's 180 or 200 pieces, like a university band, which is where most of my arrangements are for, a standard license could be anywhere from $180 to $500 for a song, for one song, Bohemian Rhapsody or whatever it is. And then the medley version of that is if we're, doing a mashup kind of a thing, we're going to do a Queen show and it's going to be Bohemian Rhapsody and Radio Gaga and Don't Stop Me Now. You've got those three things all in one song that really don't break. That becomes a medley. And the only thing that's tricky about that is if those are somehow controlled by different publishers, which happens because if it's across the span of the lifespan of the band and they change labels or publishers or whatever, it just depends on who got the rights to what. If one publisher charges more than the other, then whatever the highest amount is, the others automatically get that same amount of licensing attached to them. It's called the most favored nations clause. And that applies to anything like this. It's not just for music. It's when you're trying to smash things together, whatever the highest value of the license is, you have to do that on the other ones too. So that's kind of tricky. And sometimes it means, especially when you're thinking about marching band or show choir, the kind of things where you might be mashing up stuff quite a bit, you go, that's not going to be a medley. We're going to stop in between, or we're going to add a different song in there that's more reasonable. Because it's the kind of thing where you could be like, that's 200, that's 800, and that's 200. Well, now we just went from 1,200, 2 plus 8 plus 2, to 2,400. I mean, we doubled the price just because of that one song that's too expensive. So I feel like maybe Carmina Burana is that way. That there are some songs from Carmina Burana that are more or less, and I think O Fortuna is one of the most expensive, and that's one of the most recognizable that everybody wants to do. So that gets tricky. And the other thing about the way that those licenses are done now is they're usually carrying a limited term for performance. Like with Tresona, the standard is it's a 3-year performance term. And then if you want to continue to use that arrangement in performance beyond that, you have to relicense it, which I don't get, but I'm sure there's a good reason somewhere.
Probably because the value will change over those 3 years.
Yeah, that's possible.
O Fortuna wasn't always as popular as it is.
That's true. It's been in a lot of cell phone commercials and stuff or something. I can't remember what they were for, but I remember thinking that's a very funny use of that piece of music. Okay, and then print rights, that's the right to duplicate the music. So you don't get that explicitly when you purchase music unless the music says that explicitly. And so if you want to make more copies, you need to get permission from the publisher. Dramatic and adaptive rights really aren't as much as applied to music. I guess you could say marching band, maybe show choir, depending on how involved it is. I mean, if you're doing musical theater, this is exactly where it applies. But there's a separate set of rights to the plot, the character, the story, the costuming, than the music. So if I have permission to arrange the music from Aladdin, I can make the arrangements and we can perform the music. But if we're going to have a big genie out there and we're going to have a bunch of people in costumes, we actually also need another set of rights, permission to use the dramatic and adaptive rights. And the final set of rights goes back to your question, drum roll, performance rights. Yes, there you go. So there are... The main thing that educators need to know is that K through 12 education, you're all exempt from performance rights. You don't have to worry about them if you're performing them at an institution that is K-12. I don't think it's even just public. I think it might be nonprofit though. So that might take out some of the private schools. Most private schools and most universities and most performance venues have a blanket license from the organizations that grant these. So there are 4 in the United States, BMI, ASCAP, CSAC, and Global Music Rights. You can choose any one of them to go get a license for the music that you're going to play. They all have a relatively friendly website. And this is the kind of thing where if you're going to have a concert in the park, or you're going to, I think maybe even like a parade. But see, all of these things, if there's some sort of a overseeing organization, in other words, there's a difference between I'm going to take my band to this stage and I'm going to put on a concert for 1 hour and then leave, versus I'm going to a festival that's concerts in the park, or a parade where there's a lot of people. I guess the point here is that you just need to check with whatever organization is coordinating the event or organizing the event, and see if you need to get licensing or if that's already been covered. Because a lot of times it is. I mean, my understanding, groups that go to the Rose Parade, they're not having to apply for that because the Rose Parade organization does it. But I am not 100% sure of that. So the main thing is ask the question. Even though the answer might cost you money, it costs you less money than getting sued.
Can I interject a story here?
Mm-hmm.
So last year for the Music Ed Summit, I had a presenter want to showcase a selection of pieces for middle school band.
Mm-hmm.
And I, of course, wanted to make sure that we had the proper licensing rights to stream that, which was going to be, performance basically. So I ended up going through all of these pieces. He had like 6 on the list. It was an awesome session, by the way, and everybody who teaches band should totally get in and watch it. Mm-hmm. But anyway, he called it colorful. I could go on. It was amazing. Anyway, so I went ahead and did the work of trying to find all of the licensing for these pieces. And some were pretty easy. You just fill out, the form on the publisher's website. And then it turned out that several of them were all ASCAP. So I just got on ASCAP and filled out information about my event and about how many people we were expecting would end up seeing this thing. And they were super good about it. It was way more affordable than I thought. I think it was less than $200, which, for an organization really isn't that huge of a deal. Certainly for me, it was worth it. And that was for an entire year of performance licensing. So that means when we're coming up on the next opportunity for people to live stream their performances, I can say, just pick anything from ASCAP because we're covered. So it was actually pretty easy, and they were nice about it and called me to just double check. They sent me like stickers and stuff. It was relatively easy.
That's great. Well, that's interesting. You just taught me something. I didn't realize that when you get the license, it's for anything that anything that's under their umbrella. That's great.
Yeah. They sent me the link here. Anything that's on here is good to go. It was relatively easy. Conversely, there was one publisher, and it shall remain unnamed, that I never heard back from. And so I feel like I did my due diligence to make that happen. And they emailed me 6 months after the event and said, hey, we can go ahead and license this now. And I was like, that was 6 months ago, friends.
Right. So that's fascinating. Well, and I agree that publishers are supposed to be businesses and business people that are there to help serve their clients, and our publishers' clients are the end users. So that's too bad in that respect, that's how it went down. But I'm very glad to hear that talk to somebody who's done it and has been able to get through the process, and it's not hard. And in fact, it was surprisingly beneficial to you. That's really good. And you actually covered the very last point here on the performance licensing, which is streaming, because that counts. You're putting on a public performance, or even if it's not public, if it's closed circuit, you're streaming it. If you're streaming the audio, that's one thing. And if you're streaming the video, that's another, if you're getting into the part where you're doing something dramatic or adaptive. I don't think you would need a synchronization license for a live performance. I think you only need a live performance license, but check with your attorney.
And it's different if you record it and make it available for, multiple uses. So this is why, for example, I'm hosting the World Choir Festival, which is going to be a full day, hopefully, of choir performances, which will be streamed live, but they're going to be pre-recorded, and then we stream them the day of the festival for adjudication, and then we are not keeping them. It's the one time to watch it. We're not going to do a replay.
Right. And yeah, that's funny. That's exactly what I should have said, is that a synchronization license would be for future performance. In fact, that I believe, in talking to some of the people that were at the beginning of this, I would call it a movement to correct what's been happening over so many decades of people just using the music whenever they wanted. The biggest, it's a negative term, but the biggest violators were marching bands and drum and bugle corps, all the pageantry arts that I have spent so much time with, myself included. I mean, for almost 30, well over 25 years, I've been doing this, and I didn't get my first thing of permission, at least until it must have been 2013, 2014. And that's because we all figured out how wrong it was that we were doing. I mean, there are still people working, very qualified, very experienced band directors out in the world right now in the United States, especially in the athletic bands world, who think it's ridiculous that we have to pay to use this music. And I can understand that it was shocking and that we all got educated and we all have to go, okay, well, that's too bad. But we really were, cheating all these people of this money for decades and decades and decades. So now we should do it right, because we know. And instead, there is still a faction of people who think that these licensing organizations are evil, and I don't get it. And that's really hard for me as a composer to hear people say things like that. The point is, the thing that really, there was two, I think, major events that triggered how we all became aware. And many people became aware when they were sued. But the first thing was the show choir situation, because that, I'm not very familiar with show choir, but somebody described it to me as it's Glee. It's the show Glee. If you ever saw the show Glee, that's high school show choir to some degree. And some are bigger, some are smaller, some are more elaborate, some are simpler. But a lot of times, the performance is 5-7 minutes and it's 20 tunes in there. It's just, they're all slammed together as cleverly as possible. So the amount of money that should cost is a lot. If you're, considering what I was saying, let's say it's $200. Well, $200 times 20 tunes, that's $4,000 just to license it. And by the way, somebody has to write it. Somebody's getting paid to write it. So, what are we spending there? Are we spending $8,000-$10,000? I don't know. But there was a school in Southern California, which I think, based on the lore that I've heard, was the inspiration for the show Glee. Really good show choir. And they were doing, several of these a year. And the guy that was the director had been there for many, many years, well beyond 10. And at some point, somebody said, hey, you aren't paying for this stuff. And he said, well, what do I need to pay for? And a debate/lawsuit ensued. And I feel like the ticket at the end of it was 6 figures. And and it got really ugly in a lot of ways, is what it boils down to. But it alerted these publishers to the fact that there is a lot of money to be had in that show choir market. And then the other big thing was what happened 5 or 6 years ago with the big organizations, Bands of America, Drum Corps International, WGI. They all had the, the name of it just escaped me, but it was the online repository. The fan network, that's what it was called. You could go for a fee, you could sign up and you could watch all these videos from any time that anything they had uploaded, 1992 Santa Clara Vanguard, or these, Winter Guard performances from way back then, same thing with BOA. And that had never been properly licensed. And it wasn't because those organizations didn't think they were licensing it. They did have somebody that they thought was taking care of it. But at the end of the day, they still owed a lot of money, again, 6 figures plus. And that's why that doesn't exist anymore. You made me think of it, because now the summertime for the drum corps, and also in the winter season, they use the same platform for the color guards and the indoor drum lines. They have Flow Marching, which is Flow Sports, is a company that goes around and essentially covers everything that the big networks don't cover. And you sign up for a subscription to their service, and then you can watch these live events. But after the live event, it's gone, and there's no more access to it. So that was very different than the way the fan network used to be, where you could go back and watch archived performances. But that's a whole different kind of license, and it costs a lot more. And I think what it boils down to is the management of it was just insanity. There's just so much to do. Each drum corps show might have 5, 6, 8 songs in it. times, 40 in a season times 40, 50 seasons. That's just the drum corps. Then you do the bands, then you do the winter guards, then you do the indoor drum lines. So I think they pulled the plug on the whole thing, and I have no idea. Well, they did pull the plug on the whole thing. I don't know if they have plans to try to do that in the future, but in the meantime, I imagine they're archiving those performances, and there might be a chance that they'll license them and put them back up. And then the last thing that has happened over that transitionary period, there are times there's a show, I think it was 2017, the Boston Crusaders did a show about the Salem witch trials. And there's a very kind of brutal scene. It's very emotional, where they burn a witch, and they use, it's really funny. I think they use kind of the same technology they use in Pirates of the Caribbean to create the flames, but it works, and it's very dramatic.
You realize in the same sentence you said that it was very dramatic and it's funny. Okay, go on.
Oh, well, the technology they chose was funny, but the moment was very dramatic. And it worked really well. But the soundtrack to that, whatever the music is that the drum corps is playing behind it, which is so emotional, is silent on the recording, because they did not pre-license it. And then when they went to license it, the publisher would not give them approval. For the synchronization license, they had the rights to do the arrangement, but they didn't have the rights to synchronize it. So now, any time we want to go back and look at that amazing moment in drum corps history, it's silent. So those are some examples of how it can go, and how knowledge at the front end and preparation at the front end, it goes a long way for making sure that you get what you want at the end, and you're complying.
And it's okay to stream it, but once you record it, then you need a mechanical license. And if it's going to have video with it, then you need to have a synchronization license.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the mechanisms for getting those things, like I said, they're not that hard, but again, Google's your friend. It's a good place to start.
Yeah. Nice. This has been so super informative. Can I interject a thought?
Sure.
I liken it to my husband's a professional photographer, and he has invested thousands and thousands of dollars in his photography equipment, in his time, in his education, just in his website, in me. That's a joke. Okay. Anyway, so once he takes a photo, that is his intellectual property. Exactly. And if you were to take that photo and just use it without his permission or without paying him anything, now he's invested all of that for nothing.
Exactly.
For nothing. And he actually got so upset the other day, and he doesn't ever listen to this podcast, thankfully. But his friend took one of his photos off of his Facebook page and edited it. And so it was, which is like if you were to take a piece of music and create an arrangement, and this friend didn't ask permission, and he went ahead and posted it and kind of claimed it as his own, which I think anybody can see how offensive that would potentially be when you do the work and it's your brain matter that created this thing, and then somebody takes it and copies it and changes it, and then they're like, now it's mine,
Absolutely.
So I think if you look at it not just as music, because we've been so ingrained, like you said, we've been doing it this way for so long, but if you look at it not like it's music, but it's something tangible.
I hear all of that, and I think that's a great message to send. And it's funny hearing you say it, because you sound a little bit like me when I'm talking about the music. And the first response from the band directors, from the choir teachers, from any of the educational population is often, yeah, but where am I supposed to get the money to pay for that? And it's, it's funny because, like, if you took, I know you spend a lot of time helping, especially band directors, be better managers. And so those band directors hopefully have like a budget that says, here's what I need to spend on all these things all year. And it's kind of like one of those line items is probably transportation. And so that's going to involve some buses. If the buses were just sitting on the side of the road and nobody noticed, is it okay if we took them and took the kids to the band competition and came back? It's fine, right? I mean, we filled it up with gas, or what? I don't know, the analogy spins out of control pretty fast. But the idea that just because it's there and it's convenient and I don't want to pay for it, I'm going to not pay for it, that's not okay. And that's just, so the answer is, I don't know how you're going to pay for it. And if you can't, please don't use it. But if you can, then let's find a way to do that and work it into your budget. And I'll tell you, I have a couple of university directors that I work with that are so awesome about this. Like they're now the ones in the way when we'll be brainstorming a show concept or whatever. And, we'll get to a thing. And like there are certain, in the world I live in, there are certain composers like John Williams. His stuff right now, it's kind of frozen. I'm not sure what's up with it, but you can't get rights to any John Williams thing to arrange for, at least for marching band. I don't know if it's available for other genres. So, we say, oh, yeah, then like Darth Vader's theme, Imperial March, that'd be perfect right there. And he'll be like, nope, we're not going to get rights to that. So let's just scratch that off right now. Or we, list off a tune, On the Road Again. Oh, yeah, well, remember we tried to get that 4 years ago and it was $1,200. Okay, so that's off the table. Instead of what has been this transitionary period has been people going, oh, that's right, I got to get rights. I've already paid my arranger. He's already done the arrangement, but I don't have the rights. And then sometimes it's like, we're supposed to play that at our first football game on September 9th, but we don't have the rights. And so my guys now, they know until I get the notification, which in this case is usually from Trey Sona, that it's been approved, I'm not writing a note. So, everybody's culpable in that whole scenario, right? Like the arrangers are all used to I'll just do it and somebody will figure it out. And I think the arrangers that I know in the community that I work in, they're getting wiser and smarter. So they don't get themselves into a hole or do work for no reason. Or, the worst case is you do the work, your customer, your client pays you, and then they can't use it. That's no fun for anybody. Mm-hmm. So nobody feels good about that. So just planning ahead, I'm talking to guys right now about what we're going to do this fall so that we can get everything in that pipeline, get all the clearances that we need, and feel comfortable about moving forward with the actual work.
So I just went ahead and will put that. I actually do have a data sheet for budgeting and tracking expenses and tracking your inventory and stuff. It's the same one that I created years ago in collaboration with Wendy Higdon, and I've updated several times since then. So that's going to be available in the show notes. So great. People can grab that and plan ahead and add licensing as a line item.
Yeah. And if it's something you're going to do, it should be in there. Mm-hmm.
So Steve, if I want to arrange something and I don't want to have to pay the licensing, can I go like open source, or isn't there something that's 100 years old that's available, or where can I go for free stuff?
Yeah. So first of all, the words public domain are your friend. Anything, I always just look it up. The general rule, I believe, is 90 years past the date of publication. So if you're looking at a piece of music and it says copyright 1930, then you are or later, or older, 1930 or older, I guess. I don't know. You got to make sure you're clear. Going backwards, then you should be in the clear. And then there are places where you can double check that. Again, I just start with Google, and it usually will send me to a publisher, or it'll send me to a copyright website where I can search. I don't have one resource for that I use. But anything that's in the public domain, that means it's available for use. It is essentially everybody's property. That's what the public domain means. So it's no one person's individual property. And just be aware that there are certain circumstances where a composer's estate can reclaim music. There are some other things like that you need to be careful of. You can't automatically assume it's in the public domain, but that is the first guideline, is that it's 90 years or older. And then there are other resources. There's a website, musescore.com. And my understanding is that anything that you post on there is licensed by them. Now, that's a thing where I probably should read that user agreement a little more carefully and make sure. But if you go to that site, there are so many different arrangements. And I do know ultimateguitar.com is a tab sharing website. And that is the same kind of thing, where if you write out the tab to Sweet Child of Mine and you post it up there, they license it with the publisher for you. So you don't have to do the licensing work. But then, we talk about what happens next. So that means that if I do my marching band arrangement and I put it up there, then I can print it out and my kids can have it, and then it's all licensed. Well, first of all, you didn't get any print rights. You got the rights to do the arrangement. You don't have rights to print it, and then you don't have rights to perform it. So know that we can't get around it that way, but those are places where you can experiment a little. MuseScore has its own software that you can download for free, which is pretty amazing. The software, it's a notation software, and it has limited playback capabilities, and then you can export out of that back up to the website. And it has some cool functions where you can just play the flute part, but hear the rest of the band behind you and things like that too. So that's a really cool resource you could just check out and bounce around on and see what's fun. I think the actual website itself is really fun for kids who just want to play stuff. It's kind of the live modern version of when I was 12 years old playing the trumpet. I would go to the local music store and buy the trumpet book called, Disney Classics or the Star Wars themes or whatever it was. There weren't that many Star Wars themes when I was 12, but there'd be a whole big, huge book now, right, of all the different themes. So, but it's, where it's like you can do that online now where you say, I'm a trumpet, you choose trumpet, it transposes the part for you, and you can play along with whatever somebody uploaded, which may or may not be accurate. That's the other thing that's kind of fun. It's all crowdsourced. So maybe your arranger was good. Maybe they weren't. You just get to see how it goes.
What about folk songs? Are those okay?
Yep. I guess I would say if it was written more than 90 years ago. And that's funny. I had to do that one time. I had to go find the printed version of a folk song. I found one and it said like copyright 1956. And I said, well, that's weird because this isn't only 50 years old. So then I did some more searching and I found the same song, copyright 1872. Well, so the first one that I had found, the 1956 version, was somebody's arrangement of it. And they put their copyright on it. I just said all the dates wrong because the guy who did the arrangement he did it when it was in the public domain. So it was a long enough time away that he could do his own arrangement and copyright that arrangement. But as long as I'm sourcing the original folk song and I'm not sourcing his copyrighted work for my arrangement, then it's okay. In fact, a very practical use of that, I believe just now, it was recently, the Firebird Suite went into the public domain, but Firebird has been in the public domain for a while. So the original Firebird, the ballet, right? Is that right? Or am I getting it backwards? It's the suite, the ballet. Anyway,
the ballet is the original, and then the suite.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. So Stravinsky's Firebird was public domain at least 30 years ago, but the suite was not because it was written so much later. So if you were going to use some of those themes we all love, you would have to say, I'm sourcing the Firebird, not sourcing the Firebird suite. And when I say it, like if anybody ever asked you. You don't have to go anywhere to license public domain music. So it only becomes a problem if somebody comes to you and says, that was my, that's not public domain. And the reality is for somebody to claim that you are stealing their arrangement of a public domain work is pretty darn hard. I don't know that I've ever even heard of that. And again, we're not trying to talk about what you can get away with, but most of the time when I do a new arrangement, I'm doing a new arrangement, and it may be sourcing this old thing, but it's my own arrangement. And I also believe that if it is not in the public domain, the rights holder to the arrangement is the original rights holder, the publisher. So that is an important distinction. I want to be clear. If three of us did an arrangement of Malagueña, a very popular drum corps marching band song, which is just originally guitar, and they all sound very similar, nobody has any argument with anybody else because the only person that owns any of them is the guy who wrote the original tune. His name is on the tip of my tongue. But anyway, so we might be borrowing ideas from each other as marching band composer, drum corps composer, arrangers, but none of us have any rights or claim to the music. So
cool. So where can we go for more information if we have more questions? Although I do not. This has been so clarifying for me.
That's great. Well, I'm going to send you several links to one of them will be tresonamusic.com, which is where you can apply for licenses to do arrangements. And then there's a NAFME article. There's a University of Texas article and a Duke article that all have good information for educators specifically, and especially talking about classroom use. But as far as the overall, all these different types of licensing, I think if you get into a situation where you need to do it, you should probably just Google that type of license and then see what the process is. And it is my intention to be doing a presentation at the Music Summit in the summer that will be a little bit more of how we actually do these things too. So if you can wait 6 months, we'll talk about it then.
Yeah, and pre-registration's already open for that. So you can actually register because we'll have amazing sessions like yours.
Very good. I'd like to just finish by reminding everybody that I'm not an attorney. and that none of this is official legal advice. And if you need legal advice like such, you should seek out a copyright or intellectual property attorney. But remember, I mean, if it's got a piece of copyright, if it's got a copyright on the bottom of the piece of music, then all these things apply, and you need to set an example for your students. I mean, if your students are receiving photocopies of music, it says to them, well, that's not important that we buy it then. And I realize that there are the gray areas, like, well, I want to keep my set pristine, and there's all the different things that we say and we rationalize. But I think a publisher would say, well, I think you should buy the set and get as much use of it out of it as you can. And if you end up using it so much that you've ruined the set, you might need to buy another set, because that's the value of the set. And again, I know nobody's made of money. It's just a change in the way we think, and it goes way, way back. I mean, I'm sure most of us that are music educators did their time as librarian or one of those roles that, you know, the good directors always needed the help. They always enlisted the help of their students. And so I spent my time at the photocopy machine as a high school student, as an undergrad, as a grad student. I mean, as a TA, it's like the quantity on my copy count account was ridiculous because of all the photocopies. So when I go back to being a graduate assistant and I look at the amount of photocopies I made, it was a lot, and I didn't know better at the time, and I was just doing what my band director told me to do. But now that we all know, and now that the information is out there, not just about the print music, the photocopies, but the licensing, the different types of licensing, we all just need to be respectful of each other as all like members of a musical community. I think a lot of times, you know, you talk about the photographer or like the composers over there. They're not part of my community. And that's not true. I mean, I would hope that I'm an integral part of your community, that I am providing part of not only the curriculum, but the general musical experience that your students get to have. So respect me as the composer, respect the other composers, and then set that example for your kids that if they get photocopied music all the time, it's not saying the right thing. It's saying we don't value the composing side of our musical community. And I see both sides of it. Trust me, I know it's just not that simple, but if we can continue to head towards that direction, it's going to be good for everybody.
You could probably hear it in my voice throughout that episode, but I felt like this was exactly what I should have been taught 20 years ago when I first started composing, arranging, and teaching. Remember to check out the show notes at smartmusic.com/blog or at musicedmentor.com for all those helpful links we talked about. Big thanks to GPG Music for bringing Steve on as our guest. Seriously though, if you're starting to think about your marching band or indoor percussion shows for next year, please go to gpgmusic.com first. The resources they have for you are so good. When I first explored them, I was speechless. And that's really saying something. Really. Just wow. And remember, it's time for you to take the next leap for your saxophone players and invest in Key Leaves. Key Leaves is also a sponsor of the International Music Education Summit. Last year, they gave away free Key Leaves to all of the attendees. I don't know if that will happen again this year, but either way, you should go to musiceducationsummit.org/registration and enter the code MusicEdMentor to save 20% on your registration. That means you'll get more than 70 professional development sessions for just under $40. It's sick. And finally, we couldn't make this podcast happen without the amazing team at Smart Music. Check out their sight reading builder and thousands of built-in play-along books and folios to help you build, manage, and grow your thriving school music program. Visit smartmusic.com to learn more about all of their amazing tools. Remember to subscribe to this podcast wherever you access them. And thank you those of you who already have. And give us that sweet 5-star rating. It really does help more music educators find this content that they need to grow. You know a music educator who can really use this info. So share the love and get it out to them. Then give them a virtual or a real high five and remind them and yourself to keep teaching on.